Thank you all for joining us this evening as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Republic of Cyprus, a country at once quite young and very ancient. Famously ancient, with 11,000 years of living history, Cyprus is where antiquity and, according to legend, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, came ashore and stayed. The third largest island in the Mediterranean Sea and its easternmost, Cyprus is at the crossroads of the three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Independence in 1960 marked Cyprus's break from Great Britain, but many empires and cultures have swept through Cyprus over the millennia. 3,500 years ago, Mycenaean Greeks established their kingdom on the island. Later, there were Phoenicians, Assyrians, Romans. St. Paul journeyed through Cyprus, and Christianity took root here. After the Byzantine period, there was Richard the Lionheart, who sold Cyprus to the Knights Templar, followed by the Frankish and later the Venetians. Ottomans battled the Venetians, pushing them out in 1571. In 1878, it was the British who took over. But let's not forget Alexander the Great, who reconditioned his fleet in Cyprus. So, in Cyprus's history, we have a mosaic of continuously alternating invasions and dominations. And this is etched in the archaeology and cultural heritage of the island. With such a rich past, it is clear that Cyprus and its people are not made to fit into a simple category, precisely because so many cultures have left their footprint on this island. Cyprus is an open-air museum, where beyond the classic ancient Greek and Roman ruins, new discoveries are made all the time. It was only recently that workers building a new walkway at the resort in Cyprus uncovered an ancient tomb, believed to date back to the 3rd century BC. But since I mentioned beach, Cyprus also happens to have some of the cleanest beaches in all of Europe, the so-called blue flag beaches. Outside the principal cities, Mediterranean landscapes prevail. Between olive trees, hillside vineyards, and the shimmery blue sea, you might think you're inside a painting, until you feel the warm breeze and the sun and realize that the painting is actually real. The result is magic, where the force of the centuries and the promise of the future are intertwined. Cyprus is this. It's the center and the soul of the Mediterranean, and it is waiting to be discovered. Now, just to get you all into the spirit of Cyprus, we're going to have a short performance by the Folkloric Pancibrian dance group.
set foot on Cyprus, haunted by the loves that enchant brief life. Words of the Greek playwright Euripides, written in his Bacchae, first performed at Athens in 405 BC. I show you here the crystallized limestone rocks off Old Paphos in southwestern Cyprus, legendary birthplace of Aphrodite herself, the spot where she washed ashore on the foam of the sea from which she takes her name. The word aphros literally means foam. Hence, today we call that continent known for its frothy shores Africa. Euripides got it spot on. Loves do haunt life. They become the markers against which we measure time. Before I met him, after her, during that time. The back of a head on a subway platform, spotted in the periphery of a momentary glance, can send a heart racing. Could it be him? Is that her? Places, too, are the repositories of memory, places where love occurred, made ever sweet by the distant echo of a romance remembered. Should we be surprised that the island on which Aphrodite was born became, in historical reality, a great theater for the drama of famous love stories? Tonight, I shall take you on a very special tour of Cyprus. We shall visit places of memory, stretching from the mythical past to the annals of history, places enchanted by the love that occurred within them. We cannot help but wonder at how prescient Euripides was, writing centuries, even millennia before these romances occurred. How did he know that Cyprus would be especially haunted by such memorable loves? He couldn't have known of Julius Caesar's weakness for Cleopatra, or Mark Antony's passion for the Egyptian queen, to whom he gave the whole island of Cyprus in what is perhaps the most over-the-top love token in all of history. How could Euripides have foreseen the love of Richard the Lion-Hearted for the Princess Berengaria of Navarre, whom he would marry in the castle at Limassol, or Desdemona's ill-fated love for Othello, played out against the backdrop of the Venetian castle at Famagusta? Let us travel city by city, site by site, and consider the rich archaeological, cultural, and historical heritage of the astonishing island of Cyprus, which in this year celebrates its 50th anniversary as a republic. We salute this fair island and thank you for the love and philoxenia that it has long shared with the world, and I should say with me, celebrating my 30th year in Cyprus in the coming year. Cypriot philoxenia, that is hospitality, is as legendary as the love goddess herself. And tonight we shall revel in it, sharing in its wine, food, music, dance, and archaeology right here in the center of Manhattan. But let us start at the birthplace of Aphrodite, the so-called Petra tou Romiou, the rocks of the Greek, where Aphrodite is believed to have washed ashore. Now, most of you are probably familiar with the setting through the magnificent painting of Sandro Botticelli, a masterpiece painted around 1486 and in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. We see the iconic image that has become known as Venus on the half-shell, cruising in for disembarkation on the Paphian rocks. What you may be less familiar with is the Homeric hymn number 6 to Aphrodite, lines that may have inspired this scene, though they were written way back in the 7th century BC. I will sing of stately Aphrodite, gold-crowned and beautiful, whose dominion is the walled cities of sea-loved Cyprus, where, blown by the moist breath of Zephyros, the west wind, she was carried over the waves of the loud moaning sea on soft foam. And there the gold-wreathed Horai, the seasons, happily welcomed her and clothed her with heavenly garments, adorning her with golden jewelry over her soft neck and snow-white breasts. The Homeric hymn and Botticelli paint a lovely image of the goddess's birth. The poet Hesiod, however, composing around 700 BC, gives a more graphic description of just where all this foam comes from. He recounts the violent tale of how Kronos, youngest of the 12 Titans, came to castrate his own father, Uranus, the sky, at the prompting of his mother, Gaia, the earth. Then the sun from his ambush stretched forth his left hand, and in his right took a great long sickle with jagged teeth, and swiftly lopped off his own father's testicles. As soon as he had cut them off with the flint blade, he cast them from the land into the surging sea. They were swept away over the main a long time, and a white foam spread around them from the immortal flesh, and in it there grew a girl. First she drew near holy Cythera, and from there afterwards she came to sea-girt Cyprus, and came forth a lovely goddess, inspiring awe, and grass grew up about her beneath her shapely feet. Gods and men call her Aphrodite, the foam-born goddess, because she grew amid the foam. Walking some 18 kilometers west and inland from this spot today, one comes to the modern village of Kuklia, which literally means dolls, owing to the vast quantities of terracotta female figurines found here throughout the ages, ancient votive dedications percolating up from the great Aphrodite sanctuary that lies beneath. Kuklia overlies Peloponnesos, Old Paphos, a settlement that dates back to around 2800 BC. Legend has it that the Mycenaean Greeks stopped here on their way back from the Trojan War. The Arcadian contingent was led by Agapenor, king of Teja, who is said to have founded the sanctuary of Aphrodite. We should note that the very name Agapenor contains the root agape, or love, evoking a special connection between founder and goddess. The Venerable temple of Aphrodite is believed to date back to the 12th century BC. It became one of the most famous cult places and destinations for pilgrimage in the ancient world, continuously in use for an astounding 1,500 years until the Christians closed the pagan sanctuary in the 4th century AD. Never mind the fact that as recently as 100 years ago, a local church in Kuklia was called Panagia Aphroditisa, or Our Lady of Aphrodite. Local memory dies hard. Here at Peloponnesos, Aphrodite was worshipped in the form of a large black conical stone of diabase, that is a dolerite, an igneous rock that originates in the peaks of the Troodos Mountains and is commonly found in riverbeds that carry it down toward the coast. This giant stone stands an impressive 1.22 meters high. It was found in 1913 and only later recognized for what it was, the aniconic image of the goddess described by the Roman historian Tacitus. The goddess is not portrayed in the likeness of a human. Her image resembles a truncated cone tapering from a broad circular base to a summit of slender circumference, he writes. The stone was set in an open-air courtyard beneath a kind of baldacchino, pictured on bronze coins issued during Roman imperial times from the 1st through the 3rd centuries AD. Indeed, Roman emperors from Augustus to the Severins made lavish donations to Peloponnesos, where emperors Titus and Domitian dedicated a new altar under the auspices of the imperial cult. The stone's powers have been invoked until fairly recent times. In the years before it was moved into the museum, young mothers of Kuklia, finding they were without milk, would come into the sanctuary ruins to rub the stone with olive oil, hoping to find a remedy. Just a few kilometers from the sanctuary on the Marcello Hill, one can visit the old city walls and the northeast gate. Here we have, to my mind, one of the most spectacular sights in all of Cyprus, the remains of a siege mound built by the Persians during the attack of 498 BC. This is one of the few places on earth where you can sit and read Herodotus and gaze directly on what he is describing. I adore bringing my students out here each May. The Persians, surrounding the city of Paphos for the better part of a year, destroyed all the shrines outside the city walls and used broken statues, building blocks, soil, tree trunks, and branches to fill this giant defensive ditch. Their goal was to build a ramp as high as the city walls and to wheel up the ramp a great siege engine, their weapon of choice for many centuries. Hundreds of fragments of incense altars, votive columns, syllabic inscriptions, and limestone sculptures have been recovered from the excavation of this ramp, and wonderfully, they all have something we crave in archaeology, a terminus ante quem. That is, they all existed before the very well-dated siege of Paphos in 498 BC. Nearly 500 bronze and iron arrow and spearheads, a bronze helmet of Corinthian Greek type, have been recovered here, along with some 422 stone cannonballs, attesting to the fact that the Persians were using some kind of catapult. Now, the Paphians were hugely clever in countering this attack, using a strategy that only miners would think of, and of course the Cypriots had been mining copper from the late Stone Age. They literally undermined the Persian ramp by excavating tunnels directly beneath their own city walls. You can walk down through these tunnels today, as my students are delighted to do here, tracing the footsteps of the ingenious Paphians creeping under the walls and beneath the ramp, where they placed large copper boilers filled with a flammable substance, setting them on fire and causing the siege embankment to suddenly collapse from beneath. New finds continue to be made every year at Palepafos, and I am thrilled to show you a relatively new and spectacular discovery recently placed on display in the Kuklia Museum. This is a magnificent stone sarcophagus of archaic date, preserving brilliant polychrome decoration found in 2006 during road building operations at Kato Alonia near Kuklia. A sword, some arrowheads, a strigil, a mirror, and pottery were found within. On the exterior of the sarcophagus, we see a figure who must be Heracles, lion skin atop his head, poised with bow and arrow. The long side preserves a very well-known scene from the Odyssey, in which Cyclops is fooled by Odysseus and his men, who escape from Polyphemus's cave by hanging on to the underside of his sheep. Here we see a boar attacking a lion, a warrior carrying a body. All of this can be seen today at the Museum of Old Paphos, which itself is housed in a magnificent building of great historical significance. The French Lusignan lords of Cyprus in the 13th century built a castle here known as the Chateau de Cavac, from which they controlled extensive sugar plantations. It was destroyed by Mamluk raids in 1426, but later rebuilt and used by the Turkish Çiftlik, the local governor. Today, the Royal Manor House incorporates the earlier medieval buildings in its east and south wing. On the ground floor, we see one of the foremost examples of Gothic architecture to survive in Cyprus. This great Gothic hall is now the setting for the Pharos Trust International Chamber Music Festival, which brings global virtuosos to Cyprus each June in unforgettable evenings, to which, again, I never fail to bring my student dig team. Just down the hill from the Manor House, one has the unique opportunity to visit a medieval cane sugar mill and refinery. This was the very first Cypriot project in industrial archaeology and has yielded invaluable insight into the economic and technological history of this important industry during the 13th through 16th centuries. Here you see the furnaces and boiler rooms, and one of my students climbing through them. More than 30,000 clay sugar molds and molasses pots have been excavated here, giving some idea of the vast scale of the operation. And that is how it's done. Returning to the sanctuary of Aphrodite up the hill, I'd like to focus for just a moment on a story involving the goddess and her first priest. Legend has it that King Cinyras was the first votary and priest of Aphrodite, ministering at her altar and singing sweet hymns in her praise. He had a young son, Adonis, who was a beautiful boy. One day, as Aphrodite was playing with her son Eros, the child nicked her with one of his arrows, making her love crazy. She set eyes on the young Adonis, and that was that. It was an intense passion this cougar had for her toy boy. Very intense. But his focus remained on hunting, which took him far afield to the green groves of ancient Idalion in the center of Cyprus, where the broad, flat plain of the Messaiouria spreads between the Troodos and Pentadactylos mountain ranges. Ares, god of war and an old lover of Aphrodite, grew jealous and sent a wild boar to kill Adonis. It slashed him with its tusks, and Aphrodite flew to the side of her dying love and sprinkled the nectar of the gods into his wounds. As each drop of Adonis's blood fell to earth, it turned into an anemone, just like the wildflowers that enliven Cypriot fields with the coming of each spring. Anemones are especially known for their brief blossoming, after which they die, just as the rosy-cheeked young lover of Aphrodite. Speaking of flowers, did you know that Cyprus is home to hundreds of species of indigenous plants, including 45 species of endemic Cypriot orchids? Oh, don't get me started on flowers, or we'll be here a long time. I can only urge you to go out to Cyprus for a glorious early spring, February or March, to spot the early flowering iris. But my favorite of all is the Cypriot cyclamena, the cyclamen, or maybe it is the almond blossoms. It's very hard to decide. This oldest of Cypriot legends is the subject of one of the oldest operas on earth. John Blow's Venus and Adonis was written as a masque in 1682, but New Grove has now named it the very earliest surviving English opera. Excavations continue at Idalion, the place of Adonis's death. The Department of Antiquities has recently unearthed the largest palace or administrative center found to date in all of Cyprus. More than 300 inscriptions written in Venetian script have been found, part of a very important archive that documents the collection of taxes by the Phoenicians who governed Idalion for 150 years, from the middle of the 5th century to the end of the 1st century BC. All of these finds can be seen in the new archaeological museum at Dali, just opened in 2008. Now, by some accounts, Adonis's mother, King Cinyras' wife, was Matharme, daughter of Pygmalion, born at Amathus, which is the setting for an even earlier love story. Amathus, first settled around 1100 BC, sits on a high acropolis overlooking a fine natural harbor just 6 miles to the east of the modern city of Limassol. It has been the site of extensive archaeological excavations by the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus and the French Archaeological Mission. By some accounts, Cinyras was founder of Amathus, a city he named after his own mother. It was the setting for a sad chapter in the annals of romance, for this is where the Greek hero Theseus abandoned his beloved Ariadne, who in turn died here, giving birth to their child. Plutarch tells us that the Amathusians buried her and built a sacred precinct to her in a grove, calling it the Woodlands of Aphrodite Ariadne. Amathus was a rich city thanks to its copper mines, grain, sheep, and fine harbor that opened it to trade with the Phoenicians, Egyptians, and others. It is very well known for the richness of its vast cemeteries that stretch along the sea outside of the city walls. Now, as New Yorkers, you may have admired the Yamato Sarcophagus, among the very first acquisitions of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, purchased from its swashbuckling and controversial first director, Luigi Palma di Cesnola, who removed over 30,000 antiquities from Cyprus while serving as American consul in the 1860s. This is an amazing work of art, integrating indigenous Cypriot style with orientalizing and Egyptianizing motifs. Here you see sphinxes on the top and the Egyptian god Bes around the side, all picked out in brilliant polychromy. With a celebrated local sculptural tradition like this one, it is no wonder that Amathus is the setting for the tale of a great sculptor, one of our longest surviving love stories on earth, that of Pygmalion. Pygmalion was an Amathusian sculptor who, disgusted by the wickedness of women and the failings of the female heart, lived on his own as a bachelor until he found a large and perfect piece of ivory from which he set out to carve the perfect female form. Often he would run his hands over the statue, imagining that he was touching flesh, not ivory. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphosis, completed in the year AD 8, tells us how Pygmalion grew ever more confident with his statue. He kisses it, and he thinks his kisses are returned. He speaks to it and holds it and gives it compliments and brings it gifts that please girls, shells and polished pebbles, little birds and many-colored flowers, and lilies and tinted beads. He dresses it up. He places rings on its fingers, and yes, in time, he rests the statue on his bed, spreading it out on a luxurious purple fabric, its head on a down pillow. When the annual festival of Aphrodite came around, Pygmalion made an offering to the goddess and then, standing by her altar, shyly prayed, "If you can grant all things, I wish as a bride to have one like my ivory girl." And the goddess heard his prayer. When Pygmalion returns home, he runs to the statue and kisses it. It feels warm. He places his lips to its once again and also touches its breast with his hand. The ivory yields to his touch, losing its hardness, altering under his fingers. He presses his mouth again against a mouth that was not merely a likeness. The girl felt the kisses he gave, blushed, and raised her bashful eyes to the light. Thus, myth holds up for us an epic lesson in the transformative power of love. Aphrodite herself presides over their marriage, and 9 months later, Pygmalion's bride bears a son named Paphos, whose line comes to found the great city. The couple also has a daughter called Metharme, and she grows up to marry King Kineros and become the mother of Adonis. Thus, we come full circle in the family genealogies that are so deeply embedded in the founding myths of Cypriot cities. Of course, it was George Bernard Shaw who popularized Ovid's tale for the modern audience in his play Pygmalion of 1912, which he adapted for the screen in 1938. This, in turn, served as the basis for George Cukor's hit film My Fair Lady of 1964. So when you next watch Audrey Hepburn in her leading role, remember that in fact you are watching a tale of old Cyprus, set in the great city of Amathus. It is well worth the walk up to the top of the Acropolis, where you will see the Aphrodite temple as rebuilt in the 1st century BC, with giant stone lustral basins for purification upon entry, the ancient predecessors of holy water founts. Local folklore has it that women wanting to conceive need only slide down the Acropolis on their bottoms to get the job done. So powerful is Aphrodite as an infertility treatment. Sliding down one's bottom one would eventually come to the Agora, rebuilt in Roman imperial times, and then the ancient harbor works, still visible today and the site of keen underwater investigation. And so with the birth of Pygmalion's son Paphos, we cross back over to the southwest of Cyprus and to the city of Nea, or New Paphos, long designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So rich is it in archaeological and cultural treasures. The city was founded by the historical Nicocles, the last ruler of the independent kingdoms of Paphos, sometime before 420, and his death in 410 BC. By the end of the 4th century, owing to its good harbor and easy access to Alexandria, Nea Paphos replaced Salamis as the capital of Cyprus. You see, following the death of Alexander the Great in 323, Cyprus had come under the rule of Alexander's Macedonian general, Ptolemy I, and his able descendants who governed Cyprus until the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC. Cyprus was a highly valued asset of Ptolemaic Alexandria, supplying it with much-needed timber for building its fleet, as well as copper, corn, wine, land, and good harbors. It provided commercial and strategic military strongholds on the principal maritime route linking Greece with the Levant and Egypt. Nea Paphos remained the capital of Cyprus under the Romans, who built great luxury villas at Katopaphos to house the political, administrative, and social elite of the city. And here I show you the vast complex that housed the Roman proconsul and his entourage, a later incarnation of the villa to which St. Paul and Barnabas would have come in AD 45 when they successfully converted the Roman consul Sergius Paulus to Christianity. Paphos is a place where you can truly walk in the footsteps of St. Paul, as here at the early Christian basilica site of Chrysopolitissa, where the Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, made an historic visit just last June, the first pope in world history to set foot on Cyprus, an apostolic foundation traced back to Paul himself. The villas at Katopaphos stretch out towards the sea, and they sit upon an earlier level of Hellenistic villas, some of which have been reconstructed here, as you see in this lineup of Ionic columns. These are decorated with elegant mosaics and revetted with colorful marbles. They boast multiple dining rooms, courtyards, and thermal baths, and they suggest the good life of Roman times out here in the Eastern Mediterranean. I show you the house of Dionysus, famous for its mosaics, which tell the tale of drinking wine at Nea Paphos. There you see Dionysus together with Acme, and a whole series of great love stories are told in the iconographical program. You see Pyramus of Pyramus and Thisbe fame down at the lower left. The nearby house of Ion contains some of the most spectacular painterly mosaics ever to be found in the ancient world. And I draw your attention to just one of them because it is a beauty contest. You see the Nereids of the sea, Doris, Thetis, Syros. They are competing with Cassiopeia in another frame, the goddess of the land. But again, all of them look very much like Aphrodite and are based on very old stylistic types. We shouldn't leave Paphos without considering the beauty of this crusader castle that sits atop all, and a magnificent building that had a very short life, destroyed in the great earthquake of 1222 AD. As we move up the coast from Paphos, we really come into what I regard as God's country. Northwest corner of Cyprus, the Akamas Peninsula, and those lovely villages leading up Drusha, Pano Erodis, Kato Erodis, and of course, I am Armenia, yes, thank you. My neighbors, I am very proud. I think I'm the only American to hold the greatest honor in my life is to be epitome demodis tis paias. So, this is my part of the world. As you go up the coast, you will find the most rugged natural beauty, covered in oleander blossoms. You can walk the gorge of the Abacas, as my students do each summer. The wildlife, the natural beauty. My idea of a great day is to jump in the 1962 Series 2A Land Rover and take the kids up the coast, see how far we can get before we need an auto mechanic. But once there, we explore the wild natural caves, this coastline of beautiful water and rocks, and the blowholes, the action of this strong sea that creates underground caves and shoots water out the top. Here you see my students going down from the surface of the rock into a narrow blowhole that has been formed from action from below, climbing down these narrow crevices, and you get into an underground cave, and then you look out to the sea and you see something like that. Like this all the way up the coast. And if you go all the way around the Acamas to the Fontana Amorosa, you will find some of the most beautiful ultramarine seas on earth with fat fish and good swimming. And this is the place where the loggerhead and green turtles are laying their eggs. And I show you two of my big heroes in my life, Andreas and Simon the Eutropoulos, who Andreas is director of the Cyprus Fisheries Department, really single-handedly saved the turtles of Cyprus over the past 30 years. And my students now participate in this program and go out on nighttime beach patrols and help move turtle nests, gather the eggs, bring them up, and keep them away from predatory foxes and humans. And if you know where to look on this lovely coastline, like Paul Croft does, you can actually find fossilized pygmy hippopotamus jawbones with teeth. Pretty impressive stuff. Now, the Cyprus dwarf hippopotamus inhabited Cyprus until the early Holocene. That is, its extinction occurred somewhere between 11 and 9,000 years ago. It was the largest animal on Cyprus, a herbivore who had no natural predators until man arrived. Weighing in at about 440 pounds, Cyprus dwarf hippos are thought to have undergone the process of insular dwarfism caused by gene pools limited to a small environment. And it's actually through carbon-14 dating of hippo bones that have saw marks proving that man was butchering the hippo, that we can date the first appearance of men and women on Cyprus to somewhere around 8,500 to 9,000 BC. It's the hippo bones that do that for us. Now I am going to show you the epicenter of the earth, right there. This is the island of Dionysus, where I have had the great privilege of excavating for the past 20 years. A small offshore island of Cyprus, and please forgive me, Your Excellencies and Mr. Ambassador, there are some people in the city of New York that think of Cyprus as the large island off the east coast of Dionysus. So I have tended to discuss Dionysus as if it is the center of the universe. We are very grateful for the license to excavate that we have held over the years for our investigation of this spot. And I bring it to you by way of yet another love story. For it was during the reign of Cleopatra VII that this small island sanctuary was founded on the island. And we believe that here the Cypriot practice of placing boys under the care of Apollo was merged with her Ptolemaic cult interests. We believe that she may have celebrated the birth of her son by Julius Caesar, Ptolemy 15 Caesarion, on this spot. We know that she went around Egypt building mamisi, birth shrines to this child, and we are beginning to think that we have a birth shrine here coexisting with the sanctuary of Apollo. Now, don't forget that famous trip up the Nile taken in 48 BC by Cleopatra, who was 22, and Caesar, who was 53 and married. Little Caesar was born within a year. Each summer during May and June, my team from New York University braves the waters, which are calm in this particular image, to open up these great trenches that have yielded so much material that points directly to Cleopatra's Egypt. Pottery and all sorts of architectural members. Pieces of what was a great temple to Apollo and pilgrimage facilities for those who came out to dine, to sleep, and to worship the god. Here you see some of the material, drinking bowls, what are called baby feeders, little jugs, dice, and coins of Cleopatra and Caesarion minted between 47 and 44 BC. We have an extremely narrow chronology on Dionysus. Carnelian frog, carnelian coming in from Egypt, a fertility charm to be worn around the neck. Scarab of Sekhmet, the Egyptian goddess of motherhood, medicine, and warfare, with strong connections to Cleopatra. And these fascinating small amulets that give, at the top you see age-old Cypriot iconography, the free-field bird, the tree of life, the panpipes, a cyprosyllabic alpha sign, and down below, totally Ptolemaic Egyptian iconography, the Isis crown, the Ptolemaic eagle, a big fat Ptolemy portrait, and a little head of a skinny little late Ptolemy wearing the double crown of the Egyptian pharaoh, the Pshent. It's very likely that this is a portrait of little Caesarion himself. Fascinatingly, our stamp seal amulets can be matched in clay seal impressions that are found at Edfu in Egypt, a place where Cleopatra celebrated the birth of Caesarion within the context of a Horus shrine. These bronze coins that show Cleopatra with the infant Caesarion were minted at Paphos. You see his little head, she's nursing him. They were minted at Paphos sometime after his birth in 47 BC. In issuing these coins, Cleopatra may have been deliberately associating Paphos, birthplace of Venus, with the birth of Caesarion. After all, the boy's father, Julius Caesar, was a direct descendant of Venus. By playing up this association, Cleopatra would have made brilliant use of myth, allegory, and political propaganda to promote the cause of Caesarion as legitimate heir not just to Egypt, but to Rome. If you're interested in hearing more, we celebrate tomorrow, and we are very honored that President Christofias and the First Lady will be opening our conference, Archaeologies of Dionysus off Cyprus, at New York University, Friday and Saturday. And I draw your attention to the fact that next Tuesday in Washington, the largest exhibition of Cypriot art ever to travel to the United States will be opened at the Smithsonian Institution. It will be on until April, and I very much encourage you to go. There you will see objects from Dionysus, our impressive lion's head water spout, and some of the Ptolemaic portraits. This team, who flew the Explorers Club flag in 1992, has continued on, it's grown, and we do have a program which we call Execu Dig, and we have a very illustrious alumni body of members of the private sector who can come out for a hefty contribution and excavate with us for a week. Thank you, Bill. Let us cross back for a moment to the great city of Limassol, the setting for our next love story, that of Richard the Lion-Hearted, whose name in Greek is so much fun to say. Ho Ricardos, to Leontokardos. On April 10th, 1191, Richard, having spent the winter at Messina in Sicily, set sail for the Palestinian coast in the Third Crusade. While in Sicily, he became engaged to the lovely Princess Berengaria of Navarre, who set out to follow her fiancé in another vessel of his fleet. There was a great storm as they sailed to the south of Cyprus, and 3 ships carrying the ladies and their entourage foundered off the coast of Limassol. The Byzantine despot of Cyprus, Isaac Komnenos, attempted to lure the ladies ashore, hoping to take them captive and hold them for ransom. For 12 days, the ships hovered offshore. The ladies were fearful to come into port, and then suddenly 2 ships appeared, displaying the Anglo-Norman ensigns. It was Richard the Lion-Hearted coming to the rescue. Komnenos' troops beat a quick retreat. And then, on the 12th of May, Richard and Berengaria were married in the chapel of the fortress at Limassol, a predecessor to the existing castle shown here, which dates to the 14th century. The nuptials took place very early in the morning, at dawn. Geoffrey de Vincennes, chronicler of Richard's crusade, gives us a first-hand account. The king was glorious on this happy occasion and cheerful to all, and showed himself jocose and affable. The sacrament of marriage was followed by Berengaria's coronation as Queen of England. The Bishop of Evreux placed the gold crown upon her head, and thus there fell to Cyprus the distinction of being the only Commonwealth territory that was the setting for an English coronation. Although Shakespeare never set foot on Cyprus, he chose it as the setting for his famous tragedy Othello. Shakespeare doesn't name the city in which the drama is set, but it can reasonably be identified as Famagusta, the greatest seaport in Cyprus at the time. Following the fall of Acre in Palestine in 1291, legions of Christian refugees fled to Cyprus and settled in the village of Amokostos, which means buried in the sand. The settlement grew into a city, developing the largest and best-known medieval harbor in Cyprus and coming to be known as Famagusta, a city held now since 1974 under Turkish occupation. Shakespeare's Desdemona was a Venetian beauty who enraged her father, a Venetian senator, by eloping with Othello, a man several years her senior and not of her race. When Othello was deployed to Cyprus in the service of Venice, Desdemona accompanied him. There he was manipulated by his ensign Iago into believing that she was an adulteress, and in the last sad act of the play is murdered by her estranged husband, who now lives on as a Cypriot table wine. Famagusta is also the setting for the last of our love tales tonight. Caterina Cornaro was born to a powerful Venetian family that had produced 4 doges and that had administered great sugar mills in the Limassol area. Just an adolescent, Caterina came into the sights of James II, the French Lusignan king of Cyprus, better known as James the Bastard, illegitimate son of Marietta de Patras and John II of Cyprus. James was looking for a powerful ally in the Venetians, enemies of his enemy, Genoa, and a maritime power strong enough to keep Cyprus from falling into Ottoman Turkish hands. The first necessary step was to find a Venetian wife. The Venetians were only too delighted to oblige, as this marriage would secure for them commercial rights rights and other privileges, and lead ultimately to their full control of the island. Caterina was married with great pomp in Venice on July 30th, 1468. She was 14 years old. The groom was not present. It was a marriage by proxy. 4 years later, Caterina finally traveled out to Cyprus and was married in person to her husband at Famagusta in October or November of 1472. But very soon after the wedding, James the Bastard died, struck down by a bad bout of dysentery whilst out hunting. Caterina was already pregnant, but her poor infant son died before his first birthday under very suspicious circumstances. Thus, Caterina became Queen of Cyprus and ruled the island from 1474 to 1489, though she was controlled by her Venetian handlers, ambitious admirals and merchants, who, in 1489, forced her to abdicate, ceding the administration of the country to the Republic of Venice. On February 26, 1489, a high mass was celebrated to mark the solemnity of Caterina's forced abdication in the Cathedral of St. Nicholas at Famagusta, where both her husband and her baby son are buried. When, after Mass, the three great doors of the west end of the cathedral were thrown open for the procession to come out, a Queen of Cyprus crossed its threshold for the very last time. The standard of St. Mark was hoisted above the city, and the Venetian admirals took formal possession of the island. According to George Bustronius, the Queen, dressed in black and accompanied by the barons and their ladies, set off on horseback. 6 knights held her horse's reins. From the moment she left, her eyes kept streaming with tears. Upon her departure, the whole population was bewailing. Caterina had come to so love the island that welcomed her as a young and ill-fated bride, and the Cypriots in their turn offered to her their love and the legendary philoxenia that they are so good at giving. Again, the stuff of opera immortalized by Donizetti. Let me close by taking you up to Pano Erodis. In the local churchyard sit 2 limestone sarcophagi. That on the south belongs to Aios Agapitikos, the saint of love, and herein Saint Agapios is buried. The one to the north holds the body of Saint Varlam and is known as the sarcophagus of Aios Misitikos, the saint of hatred. They say that if you want someone to fall in love with you, you must chip a tiny piece of stone from the sarcophagus of Aios Agapitikos, crush it into a powder, and sneak it into the drink of the one whom you wish to fall in love with you. Conversely, if you wish someone harm, just drop some of the pulverized stone from the sarcophagus of Aios Misitikos. This is the way you used to unfriend people in village life of the past. Now, in case you can't make it all the way up to Pano Erodis, there are satellite sanctuaries of these saints in Neapophos, here in these rocky outcrops. I visited the cave of Aios Agapitikos recently with Professor Christopher Faraone of the University of Chicago, world authority on ancient Greek love magic, and I scraped a little of the magic love dust from the cave myself. And I actually brought a little bit with me tonight. And should any of you require its services, do meet me at the reception over a glass of red wine, and we can negotiate a contribution to the Dionysus Island excavations. Perhaps you now understand, following this evening's presentation, why Cyprus, and Paphos in particular, are very important and effective wedding destinations. I will leave you with one last and very personal love story. Well, not really. I will leave you with my love story with Cyprus and the Cypriots. 30 years ago next year, I headed out to Cyprus for the first time. I have been back at least once every year since, sometimes 3 to 4 times a year. I thank the Cypriots who are here this evening. I thank your beautiful country for so enriching my life. And I encourage those of you who have not visited Cyprus to come and have your lives enriched. I urge you, in the words of Euripides,